times the carbon release of methane bomb, 34 times more powerful in warming than CO2, and as Malcolm brought to our attention, what does methane become? Even though it dissipates more quickly than CO2, it becomes CO2. So it can be here, what some people say thousands of years. Yeah. Man says science more nuanced. He doesn't support the methane bomb. And we'll look a little bit at his article, his blog in a minute. Warming twice as fast as scientists had thought. That's questioned by man. The Larsen ice broke off. Coastal cities will be underwater within the century. Millions of climate refugees already happening. 2 to 8 degrees of warming. We can't seem to decide what it's going to be. We wish it would be 2 or less. The albedo effect, you probably know that, is the ice melts. The dark color of the ocean absorbs more heat, and it's one of those positive feedback loops. The dieback of forest. Now, throughout the presentation, I mentioned books, and I haven't listed them on our book list on the Omni site. But if you want to pay attention to this, see Peter Brand and the Ends of the World: History of Planet's Major Extinction Events, all but one caused by climate change produced by a greenhouse gas. Number 10, no plausible program of emissions reductions alone can prevent climate disaster. And now we're in the Anthropocene. We all seem to know what that new term is. It's not so new to many people. In other words, we are so strong now, we cause some of the disasters, and a lot of people still don't agree with that.
Would you want us to hold our questions till the end?
Here's what I'm going to do. I want us to hold our questions till we get to the end of one of the articles.
Because you just said 2 or 3 things that have a lot of implications, exactly. And I wondered what you thought about that. I don't want so much the uninhabitable planet to be discussed, because there are climate scientists, geoscientists, et cetera, may have different opinions and data on what's happening, but you can lead data. So I don't so much want to contest this article. I have some more interest in the general direction of these 3 articles. That's what I'm more interested in, which gets us to the solutions. So that's the reason to just hold on until we get to the end of this article, and we'll do some little quick talk about it all. Why have we not done more? And I'm quoting, these are not my words, I'm quoting the timid language of scientific probability. Malcolm is not timid, if you've noticed. But anyway, he's one of our scientists here today. They might fail to communicate. U.S. dominated by technocrats who think any problem can be solved. Opposing cultures not see problems, so scientists are more cautious. And we have diametrically opposed ideas at the moment in the administration. Both speed of change and its slowness, we're just now beginning to see the effects from decades ago. Abstractness of numbers, look at 400 parts per million, and we want to be back to 350. 2 degrees, or not, or 8 degrees. 1.8 trillion, which is up here further up. Uncertainty about uncertainty. That's a scary thing right there for many people. Discomfort of considering very difficult problems. Now, this section D, when he mentions all of these different major problems, we've heard these, but he discusses them in a way that we may not have heard all the points to his discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and bring these up. Let me get this up because it's hard to get it to be this right.
Bob, let me interject that those 2 degrees, those degrees there are degrees Celsius, not degrees Fahrenheit. And a degree Celsius is 9/5. Well, I mean, degrees Fahrenheit is 9/5
of
degrees Celsius.
2 degrees. So Celsius is even more. There you go.
You're right.
So moving along, here are the major problems: heat death, end of food, climate plagues, unbreathable air, perpetual war, permanent economic collapse, poisoned oceans. And then the twist on the problems is his Fermi's paradox in the Great Filter. So let's see, heat death. We've already had people dying from climate heat in Europe and elsewhere. I'm not going to mention all those statistics. 6 degrees summer, labor outside would be impossible. In New York City would exceed present day by rain. And as Malcolm brought his article, here's one by Joseph Romm. I think you all know who he is, perhaps. He was climate, I can't think of what it was, under Clinton. Anyway, climate change, what everyone needs to know. You might want to look into that.
That was highly praised.
Was it?
But in Mr. Wallace's essay,
We might want to put that on our list. See, I'm going to mention all these books, and we can put all these books that I mentioned in all of the articles on our list, but I wanted you all to see all of this first. So moving on, the end of food. Here's a sure.
The prompt is on the header. If you double click anywhere within the
Can I
text,
get
it
rid
will
of it?
highlight the.
What about this?
Yes, there you go.
that's a
Thank
little
you,
better.
thanks, Alberta. Every degree of warming, food yields decline 10%. The planet may well be 5 degrees warmer by 2100 and 50% more people. As we already know, planting zones are moving north, and the boreal forest does not have good soil. So as the planting zones move north, plants grow less well. Unprecedented drought everywhere. Midwest has suffered through droughts not seen in 1,000 years. Now there are 800 million undernourished. UN says that starvation events are now occurring and killing millions in the countries that you see listed up there. Climate plagues. Hi, Terry. Nice to see you. I'm going to stop. Thanks. Climate plagues. And I think we've heard about this too. Trapped in the ice, which is melting as we speak. There are diseases that haven't circulated on the planet since before humanity, so we don't have an immune system. And there was a good example about the carcass of a reindeer that had anthrax in it, sickened many and killed one boy. And that Zika is a disease mutation. Now we have flights everywhere, so we can carry a disease like that just as fast as possible. Unbreathable air. At rate CO2 growing can be at 1,000 parts per million by 2100. It affects cognition, and so we can have cognitive decline up to 21% if it's 1,000 parts per million, just to give us an idea about that. Some people say, anyway, ozone likely to increase by 70%. And they give an interesting item on China, that the melting of the Arctic in 2013 remodeled China's weather patterns, thus no natural ventilation for their industrial air pollution. Smog was the cause of about a third of the deaths in China that year. I'm skipping some of this because it's just lots of stuff that a lot of us are familiar with. Let me keep moving this up if you can see it. I hope you can. Sorry. So perpetual war. Many think Syria's drought is cause for the war, but Lebanon had the same crop problems but didn't fall into war. For each half a degree of warming, there's a 10 to 20% increase in the likelihood, oh, pardon me, I skipped. No, I'm fine, perpetual war. 10 to 20% increase in likelihood of armed conflict. Since the U.S. military is obsessed with climate change, they actually are, and their Navy bases can be drowned as sea rise occurs. And since they're trying to be the world policeman, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. And many think that in the Mideast, the elevated level of strife is probably caused by warming in general. And we've always heard about heat as causing higher crime rates. Permanent economic collapse. This seems to be one of our favorites. Global neoliberalism said economic growth would save us from everything, but after the 2008 crash, economic economists were talking about fossil capitalism, and that the reason that we have had such incredible expansion is not due to capitalism, is not due to innovation, is not due to technology, but due to this injection of fossil fuels, that we can grow more food, even though it's wrong, because we're growing more food with synthetic fertilizers, which are based on fossil fuels. And it's killing the soil, and 60% of the soil has gone down the big rivers into the gulfs of whatever country practices first world agriculture. At any rate, no, it's because of just a sudden injection of, as we said, fossil capitalism. And before capitalism, we had subsistence living. And so Jeannie's going to present in December a subsistence perspective and get another view of the importance of remembering what subsistence and resilience is about. Richard Heinberg certainly feels that's important. Maybe we could return to the steady state after the devastation, but because of fossil fuels, more than likely not. Each degree of warming costs an average of 1.2% GDP, and since GDP is counted in single digits, 1.2 is dramatic. Chance that climate change will reduce global output by more than 50% by 2100, with a 23% loss in per capita earnings. The Great Recession of 2008 was just a one-time shock of a 6% loss. So imagine an economy half as big as today. And he says how absurd it is for businesses or governments to postpone emissions reductions because of the costs involved. Somewhere I've seen, is it 600 trillion? It's in the trillions to go totally renewable. Poison oceans. If there's no carbon reduction, there'll be 4 to 10 feet sea level rise, 2100. A third of major cities are coastals, and here's a list of so many other things that will be affected by sea level rise. 600 million people live within 10 meters of sea level. Warming ocean is acidification. 1/4 marine life is in the reefs that are dying, and they supply food for 6 billion people. The anoxic dead zones, as we see in the Gulf of Mexico, fish die off. And I enjoyed this last very morbid statement that's true. Hydrogen sulfide, it occurs because of the bacteria eating dying fish. So toxic it hit us in the time 97% life died out on Earth. It is the preferred gas for a natural holocaust. So here's where we're just about to end this article by David Wallace Wells. And he mentions the great filter. And he says, so why can't we see it? This is the book that he mentions here, The Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh, is fictional, but based in science. It reminds me a little bit of some of the books that Art was reading, 40 degrees below, 50, it had to do with New York City and Washington, D.C. But anyway, you might want to look into that book. I've noticed there are quite a few fictional accounts out there on climate change. So will we ask ourselves, instead of where were you when the trade towers fell, or where were you when Kennedy was shot, where were you at 400 parts per million? 6 degrees, there's going to be more frequent hurricanes. We don't even have to talk about Harvey. We already know that so many of the scientists believe that because of the warming of the Gulf of Mexico, that added more fuel to the fire of the greatest amount of rain ever to fall that we know of on continental USA. And he goes ahead and says a couple of other things kind of suggestive about, will it be like green time for the Australians? But James Hansen, Our Children's Trust, is based on equal protection clause that in failing to consider warming, the government is violating equal protection, and now there will be greater cost to future generations. Hansen has given up solving the problem with the climate tax alone. Now he's trying to calculate the cost of extracting carbon from the air. And now here's a comment on Fermi's paradox. Let me move this on to the next page. Why is it in a universe so large, this is Fermi's paradox, have we not met other civilizations? And the thought is that the great filter is that when civilizations grow as big as perhaps ours is, we burn ourselves out. And by 2050, emissions have to fall each decade. There is a great confidence in human ingenuity. For example, the Apollo project, the hole in the ozone layer was patched in the 1980s. There was no mutually assured destruction yet. And so actually this article, as dire as it is, ends on a positive note because the author thinks we are capable. And I wondered who is David Wallace Wells, so I looked him up, and he's the editor of the New York Magazine, and he's also a senior editor for Paris Review. But let me tell you a couple of other things that he's written. He's had articles on, here's one, models are too conservative. He likes talking about climate change. He had an interview with James Hansen, and the interview was called Planet Could Become Ungovernable. He had an interview with Michael Mann, Low Probability but Catastrophic. And then one last article, the man who coined the term global warming on the worst case scenarios for the planet. So Wallace Wells has given us a lot of things to think about. Shelley sent me this Michael Mann blog. Heinberg mentions Mann, but not to the extent of this blog. So Michael Mann has some bones to pick with Wallace Wells. And he says first...
What's the name of this now?
It's Michael Mann's blog on Facebook. And I don't know, I would have to send you the link.
No, it's okay.
Shelley sent it to me. He said, this article we just looked at is getting so much play this morning, I figured I should comment on it, especially as I was interviewed by this author. Now, before we go into Michael Mann's return, does anybody want to say anything on the Wallace Wells article? Questions now? Sure.
That quote that you had up there, no plausible program of emissions reduction alone can prevent climate disaster. That plausible word is just filled with assumptions. That's assuming that we have to have a society that goes on and is as industrialized and technological and consumer-focused as what we have. We don't have to have a society like this. And there is no way in the world that a society like this is going to provide a good life to however many billions of people we end up with. We can't do it now, we wouldn't be able to do it later. It's totally unfair, it's totally inequitable. You're gonna have wars if you have an inequitable society. It's not plausible for us to continue with a society anything like the one that we have. And you know, when they say there's no plausible program of emissions reductions, that means what they're thinking of doing
No single,
is...
didn't he qualify that? No single one. Would you read the sentence again?
Go back.
Because that struck me too, and I thought he was saying that we need a comprehensive program.
I think
to
he's saying no
resist.
geoengineering.
It says no plausible program of emissions reductions alone
There.
can prevent climate disaster.
See,
you know,
now
we're going to
that's
talk
different.
about this with Heinberg, because Heinberg also believes in don't do planned obsolescence and let's lessen consumption. So it's similar, but not the same as what Jeannie's saying. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Okay. So I read that differently than you're reading it, and I'm reading it that he's saying that we have to have geoengineering, and when he's talking at the end of his, you know, carbon capture is a form of geoengineering. The aerosols that they're talking about projecting into the atmosphere is a form of geoengineering. I think that anything like those techniques are incredibly dangerous. They would be unproven. They would be doing an experiment on a global level. We're already doing that. We've already gotten into huge trouble. This is capitalist patriarchy at its absolute worst. This idea that we can control nature, we can control the planet. We need some humility here. This is just a mess. And we need to really, you know, we just need to really rethink this in a major way.
In the solutions part of what I'm going into, there's comments similar to what you're talking about. Dick, did you have another comment?
Well, yes.
We need to move on, everybody.
I interpreted it differently, Gene. I thought he was giving us a comprehensive list of the problems, and that he was saying in that other sentence that no one solution is going to cope with all of these dysfunctions, and he treated geoengineering as a dysfunction along with the others.
Almost not everybody that will be here today does that. Geoengineering has a problem.
In my paper, I cite National Academy of Science studies in which they discount geoengineering. They said, you know, it's probably, there's no conceivable way in which it can really work, and the possibility of unaccounted for side effects is really too great. But
that's what I thought he was saying. He dismissed it.
The one that they really approve of is stop deforestation and start reforesting.
Okay, folks, let's stop and let's continue on, because all of these are going to come up in stuff that you probably have not yet read.
But some of us won't remember that long.
And that's what I really want us to talk about, that climate mobilization victory plan. I really want us to talk about that. Okay, so here's Michael Mann. He says, I have to say I'm not a fan of this sort of doomist framing. It's important to be upfront about the risks of unmitigated climate change And I frequently criticize those who understate the risk, but there is also a danger in overstating. And then he goes on, I'm going to skip around here. The article argues that climate change will render the earth uninhabitable by the end of the century, but fails to produce the promised info. And he also, these are things I've already brought up. Article paints an overly bleak picture by overstating some of the science. It exaggerates, for example, the near-term threat of climate feedbacks involving the release of methane. I've already mentioned that. We don't know if the methane bomb is for sure or not. And some of the other articles are going to talk, Heinberg is going to talk about that. Let's see.
We know the methane bomb is there. We just don't know
the sensitivity
how
of
it
the
can be
Earth's
detonated.
Right, yeah.
But he did give examples of it already being
Okay,
detonated.
we're moving on. We're moving on. Let me keep on. I want to finish this article and then you get another turn. Because I really want us to cover all of this information. This is, to me, some of the best information. Anyway, these are people responding to Michael Mann calling Wallace Wells doomist. Here's the thing though, as a comment that was just posted stated, thank you, the article was so depressing, people will now assume it's all okay. As a species in this modern day world, people seem to need doom and gloom to actually pay attention. Here's another one. Here's another fellow responding. So basically, we're screwed, but we don't tell anybody we're screwed. Okay, here's another one. The problem is now people will read this and just say, oh, see, not so bad, and carry on like normal. This is an enormous problem, and maybe scaring people might help. And here's another one. It's only the messages on solutions that have seemed to constructively result in sustainable action, which is the reason I want to keep moving on so we can talk about these LEAP manifest and the victory plan. Here's another one. If we tell people how bad this could get and how fast it will produce inaction, Michael, I respect the hell out of you and your work, but no one is acting, period. When nothing is being done, perhaps it's time to revisit the idea that scaring people with the truth is a bad idea, so it's not. At any rate, you can see the response, and of course I've selected some of the responses because it leads perfectly into the next article, which is the one by Margaret Klein Selman. And she's a clinical psychologist.
Is that the order you suggest? Because that's not the order you gave them to us.
Right.
And now you'd like to, I mean, you really do suggest that order.
This is the order. Because
Wallace, Solomon, Heinberg.
This is the timing. If you'll see the dates,
yes.
I put the dates on every one. The first one was July 10th. The second one, Margaret Klein Salmon, is July 17th. Richard Heinberg's is July 27th. So you see they're each one reacting to each other's and expanding, and I didn't put it down right on the Omni forum, for the dates. The dates are really important. So I'm just going to say a few important things. Anybody else on Michael Mann? Go for it. All right, here we go. The planet is more needs to pay to be afraid. Now that you know who Salomon is. Clinical psychologist. The article has caused major controversy in the climate community, in part because of some factual errors, which we pointed out on our command. Though by and large the piece is an accurate portrayal of worst-case scenarios, but by far the most significant criticism of the piece received that it was too frightening. Now she's going to address that in a moment. Well, I think Mann and another scientist are brilliant scientists who identified some factual problems in the article. I strongly disagree with their statements about the role of emotions, namely fear. In climate communications and politics, I'm also skeptical of whether, this is important, whether climate scientists should be treated as national arbiters of psychological or political questions in general. I would like to offer my thoughts as a clinical psychologist and as a founder and director of the Climate Mobilization. So climate scientists are telling us what's happening, but we need a different force to motivate us to doing something. So here are her two words that are the summary of, in a sense, of her article. Affect tolerance, the ability to tolerate a wide range of feelings in oneself and others. It's a critical psychological skill. And affect phobia, the fear of certain feelings in oneself and others, is a major psychological problem as it causes people to rely heavily on psychological defenses. Excuse me. So these two ideas, see where you fit in. Can you tolerate the scariness of climate change? Or are you, denying some aspect of it and not able to work through that and move to the next level? Much of the climate movement seems to suffer from affect phobia, but that doesn't mean we should try to avoid making people feel such things. Experiencing them is a normal, healthy, necessary part of coming to terms with the climate crisis. So here's another, this is an essay, not so much a book. So I continue, if anyone wants this, what I put together here, send to them, I'll be happy to send it to them. You just have to look.
What you're projecting up here is not the original text, but
That's right.
is your
This is what I
summations
pulled
or the concept. Well, I'd like to have your selections in.
I'll be happy to. Anybody else who
Yeah.
wants it, I'll be glad to send it.
Yeah,
Because this to me
Perhaps
takes the
if we
major
could-
points that I'm most interested in. Yeah.
Perhaps it would be good to distribute that document through
All of you.
the entire group.
Or to the whole list, that's fine. To me, this is like the title of that group that this woman started. It's climate mobilization, and I have long felt we needed a World War II impact on the United States as the primary CO2 emitter to finally do something about it. So, moving on. Our job is not to protect people from the truth or the feelings that accompany it. It's to protect them from climate crisis. The climate mobilization exists to make it possible for people to turn their fear into intense dedication and focused action. So there's another article that she mentions. It must be accompanied, the problem of climate crisis must be accompanied with discussion of solutions. Solutions have to be up to the task of saving civilization in the natural world. Only solutions that offer effective protection is a maximal intensity effort grounded in justice that brings the U.S. to carbon negative in 10 years or less. Many climate scientists are saying we have 3 to 10 years in which to mitigate the worst of the catastrophe. And so the magic combination is telling the truth about the scale of the crisis and solutions. Joe Long says we aren't doomed, we're choosing